Welcome back to Tiny Grimes Games, and today I bring you a deep dive into a Keyforge deck that I own. This deck is called MacDeath of Waropolis Burg. So this is the deck that I own. I got on the pre-release day. I love the name, by the way, MacDeath. But what I'm going to do here is not talk about how do you know if you have a good deck and try to tier my deck or something like that. It's pretty early to be making claims like this. Instead, what I'm going to do is talk about how I think about decks. What am I looking for in decks? How am I thinking about them? And then how am I going about from that information trying to concoct some sort of win condition? So let's talk about what I'm looking for in decks. The first thing I'm going to look at is really simple questions like how many amber producers are there? And in this deck, there are 11 amber producers. Another question I'm going to ask is how many creatures are there? Actually, I didn't count that yet. So let's see. We've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Now, I'm not saying that there are any sort of metrics where I say, oh, if it doesn't have X amount of creatures, that's a bad deck or something. I just think it's really important to understand this really basic information about your deck. Is your deck creature heavy, creature light, somewhere in the middle? At 21, I'd say I'm going to have a pretty big board regularly, and my opponent is going to have to be removing my guys, or my guys are going to stick. Another important thing to think about with these decks is this deck is 4-0 right now. But with Keyforge, more than any other game I've played, I feel like you cannot be results oriented when you're thinking about decks and whether they're good or not. There are so many variables in Keyforge. Was your opponent new to the game or skilled at the game? Are they playing with the good deck? Normally, if you sit down and play with someone, you can assume they're playing with a good deck unless they're not, right? You can just be like, okay, I know this deck, this is a tier 1 deck. Whereas with Keyforge, you really don't have any idea how good the deck is when you sit down, and even after playing against it, unless you're really astute, you may not have a great idea of how good they are. I would say the 4 games that this deck has won are all against sort of mid-level decks, which is where I'm tempted to say this deck is as well. All right, so let's talk about the next thing. So it has 11 amber producing cards. That's pretty good. I'm pretty excited about that. What I'm real excited about is the Dust Pixie, who gets me an amber producing card on a body. This dude is one of my very favorite creatures. I know it's only 1 strength or 1 power, but that's still 2 amber that were produced when you play it, and if they don't deal with it, it's just reap, 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 and it's piling up the amber even though it has no power. No big deal there. Okay. Other things I'm looking for are mass removal. What is my removal suite going to look like? This is Dis, so I'd love to have a gateway to Dis or something else big, but unfortunately this deck just doesn't have that. It has 1 copy of 3 Fates, which is a very good card, except for the fact that we saw this deck was creature heavy, and not just creature heavy, but it's creature heavy in Brobnar. It has tons of big guys. In Brobnar alone, we've got Smash at 5, 2 copies of Crump at 6, and then we have the Ancient Bear at 5. We have the Terror at 5. We have 2 Pit Demons at 5. So it's really important to understand that if we're going to be relying on 3 Fates as a removal option, we really have to be doing things like trading off our big creatures when warranted, knowing that we'll be drawing into 3 Fates to be able to erase their biggest threats, if they even have big threats, right? It's another thing. You have to read your opponent's deck. What kind of deck do they have? Are they relying on like Shadows and Mars, where they're going to have mostly small guys and only 1 or 2 maybe big guys? It's really interesting, and 3 Fates is hard to use in a deck like this. I love 3 Fates so much in like a Shadows deck with small guys, and I have a deck where it has 2 3 Fates in it, and it seems to fit that deck a lot better. In this deck, if this is one of my main removal cards, I'm kind of in trouble in that department. I do have another sort of mash-ish removal card in the Common Cold, which is a rare, so you might not have seen this before. Gets an amber when I play it. Awesome. Love it. Deal 1 to each creature. Yikes. That is not that much of a mass removal. But I guess Mars decks, at least, it's going to be really destructive. So when I sit down with this deck, the first thing I need to be thinking of is my opponent playing a Mars deck. If they are, then I know I have the ability to draw into this just absolutely silver bullet answer to their deck if they build up a board. So in other words, when I'm playing, I know I should be fighting against the non-Mars creatures, knowing I'll be drawing into this at some point. I also have another mass removal-ish guy. He can deal 1 to each enemy, and I do get to combo that with War Drummer. So bottom line, this deck is super weak on mass removal. It is dicey. If my opponent builds up a huge board, I am going to lose. So knowing that means it has to shape my gameplay. That as I'm going through this game, I have to be fight heavy instead of reap heavy, which is where I might prefer to be. Because if I'm not fight heavy and I let them build up a board, I'm dead. And even if I build up a board and they build up a board and we're reaping against each other, I don't know if they have the opportunity to wipe the board when it suits them, or even some sort of one-sided stun all creatures, whereas I got nothing. I'm just hoping I don't have that happen to me. So that's a little bit dicey. And then Smash is, you know, a single target temporary removal. So bottom line, this deck does not have a lot of removal, and you might be wondering, well then how the heck are you 4-0 with this deck? Because it does do some other things. Okay. So another element of decks that I'm immediately looking at is how can I steal or stall my opponent, right? One of the most powerful things you can do in this game is when your opponent gets to 6, gets to 7, have a way to immediately pull that away. So Shadows, of course, is the best at doing that out of nowhere, but a lot of other factions have cards to do that. For instance, Bumpsy, if I had that guy, could just jump right in and make him lose an amber. There's the guy who, like Scholar or something on Dis, when you play him, if they have 4 or more, you take an amber. I have none of that. Here's what my suite looks like. This dude, Grenade Snib. So that's, if he's destroyed, they'll lose 2. Great. Another Grenade Snib. Cool, cool. Crump. He has to fight and live, according to the rules on fight. And if they do, they lose 1. And another Crump. And that's it. Oh, that's not true. That's not totally true. I also have 2 Pit Demons, which steal 1. So I have 6 ways to take my opponent off of 6 or maybe 7, but they have to be on the board. So again, this deck needs to have a board. So I again, there's even more evidence that I can't leave my opponent with a board, because if I do, they can run away and I cannot mass removal them. And my guys need to have a board. They have to be on the table to be able to work. So if they have a big board and I'm just playing guys into it, they will just kill my guys and I won't get to use them when I need to. Now, my opponent won't know that that's all I have. So there is that outside chance that they'll just kind of go like, oh, I'm going to assume that this guy has other ways to steal, and so I'm not going to wipe his board, right? Like that's a possibility that will happen, but I don't think it's a good idea to rely on that. So this deck is really difficult to play because things have to go kind of well for it to win, I feel like. All right, so let's look at what else I might look at. It would be, do I have any like big combos I should be thinking about? I tend to just discard cards if they're not going to be valuable in the moment, unless there's a reason, right? So we've already talked about something like the Common Cold. If my opponent is playing Mars, I probably don't just chuck that. I probably keep that. If my opponent's not playing Mars, and I need to just play it out for 1, sure, whatever, I might just do that. I do have one big combo, and unfortunately it's not that big, but it is, oh, not Key Charge, although it could be part of the combo. I have 2 ways to get amber from creatures, but still, I got 11 on a turn, and I'll show you how. So if you just have like 2 creatures, Hunting Witch and Full Moon, it's not that great. Play Full Moon, you play Hunting Witch, that's 1. You play 2 more creatures, they're 2 each, that's 7. That's kind of a dream scenario to only get 7, and that's really the only big combo I have. But I can make it an uber combo by adding Library of the Damned, which if I play this early in the game, especially if I can go like first player, drop this, and just archive untamed creatures in my deck, or maybe archive Full Moon, then when I hit that magic scenario, I can try to craft that hand to get, say, the 11 or 12 on a turn or something. I was able to pull off 11. The problem is against a lot of good decks, they have ways to answer, X over 6. There's just a lot of cards. Of course, Bait and Switch just destroys you, but there's still a lot of other cards that say, like, cut your opponent's amber in half, or if they have more than, steal everything they have more than 6, or get rid of everything more than 6. So this is really the only big combo, and it's first of all not reliable, and second of all it's a little dicey. But I will say, at a minimum, I do have the opportunity to play Full Moon or Hunting Witch 2 separate times, maybe get 2 amber from them. But the bottom line is, what this deck is not is an explosive amber gaining deck. It doesn't have good mass removal. It doesn't have good ways to stall your opponent. So it's got a lot of problems. But it does have some really strong cards. So that's the other thing I would look at, is like, what cards have a really big impact? Control the Weak in the hands of a skilled player is really, really strong. It gives you that amber. It locks your opponent out of houses they might want to use. So for instance, if this is a turn you can get over 6, you can lock a Shadows deck out of being able to play Shadows that turn, quite possibly sneaking out a key when otherwise they'd be able to stop you. Just be able to do all kinds of stuff. My deck wants to have a board. If they start developing a board and I get kind of freaked out because I don't have mass removal, I can make them choose another house, hopefully take off a couple of guys, whittle them down that way. It has Fear, which is another way to just kind of slow them down. Since I need to control the board, I can get that biggest guy off the board while I start controlling it. I've got Poltergeist. Poltergeist, I feel like this is one of the best cards in the game. It has no chains, and it's bonkers, and it gives you an amber, and you blow up their best artifact, and it lets you do sick things. My favorite play with it was today. I was able to, my opponent was at 10. Alright, they're at 10 amber. I'm playing a deck very similar to this. It looks like I'm screwed. I have not enough steel, but I'm able to play Scholar, which is the guy that says if your opponent has 4 or more amber, steal 1. Then I poltergeisted their Lash of Dreams to make their key cost 9 and get rid of it, stopping them. Oh, they must have been at 9, sorry. Stopping them from making their key that turn and being able to win then through having more tempo. Another really powerful card is Ember Imp. And because my deck is already based around having to have a board, period, he's more effective than he normally would. Because normally what would happen is it's tough to find a spot to play him where if both people are reaping, then both people have a board, and as soon as you play the Ember Imp, they just kind of laugh and be like, okay, whatever, I'll kill him first. Then I'll play a bunch of cards. But with this particular deck that needs to control the board through fighting, it gives Ember Imp more of a chance to live. I mean, I'm not saying he lives. There's a lot of targeted removal, like Punch, that you see right on the screen would kill him. But he's still a powerful card. And with that is Toxin. He's not an amazing card in a lot of decks. His power's so low, I find he dies all the time before he gets to use. But again, in this deck where I'm having to build up a board because I don't have a choice, he sometimes gets to go off, or if nothing else, he becomes the target, maybe instead of the Ember Imp. He can have value. Let's see. Dust Imp is fine because you get to get stuff. Alright, some more high impact cards are Punch. Punch, this deck has 3 punches. I love Punch. Punch is one of the best cards. The fact that you get an Amber and get to kill a really good character is really important. You're not killing one of their giants, but I find in Keyforge that the giants are not usually important. It's usually the guys around 2 to 3 that have the biggest impact on the game, and this kills all of them, so it's amazing. Okay. Next thing I'm going to look at is do I have any ways to cheat a key out? Especially in this deck that is really going to struggle. Can I put together a turn where, say, I do something simple like play the Dust Pixie after a Lost in the Woods, or after a full moon, I mean, and be able to just grab 3 there. I had 3. My opponent wasn't worried. Then we'll say I played a regrowth, and then I go key charge and bam, make a key out of nowhere. I find key charge and the dude Char Hota or something to be really, really powerful cards. Whenever I have Untamed, if I see them, I'm very, very excited. So that's essentially the deck. The rest of the deck is the Terror, who, whatever, he rarely triggers. Ancient Bear, I just don't love the Ancient Bear. I do like him more in this deck where, like I said, I have to have a board, so I'm often fighting, and the Assault 2 is really good if you're playing a fighting deck. Dew Fairy, not good in a fighting deck, but there's 2 of them. The Reap is really powerful if you get it off. Halicor is another creature that I generally don't value very highly, but again, if you have to play a fighting deck, then he's pretty dang good. Your guys aren't taking damage. Snufflegator the same. I really don't like this guy, but in this deck he's not terrible. Follow the Leader. Again, in a fighting deck, I'm letting my guys who normally would not be able to fight this turn fight. And Way of the Bear gives me Amber and another way to fight. So essentially, the bottom line for me is when I initially looked at this deck, I thought, this deck kind of, like, at a brief glance, it looks strong. It's got really good cards like Control the Weak, Fear, Poltergeist, Emberent, Punches. Like, it has a lot of my favorite cards. But as I started looking at it more carefully, I realized I don't have good stall techniques. I don't have really any way to wipe the board. It doesn't really have explosive Amber generation. It has 11 Amber producing cards, but it's going to be more of a slow grind, control the board through creatures, slowly build up Amber, maybe get lucky with a full moon combo, maybe get lucky with a key charge, but not a super powerful deck, not a really explosive deck. To be honest, I'm a little surprised it's 4-0 so far, but it is named MacDeath, and that's probably why. So hopefully this video gave you some sort of insight into at least how I think about decks, how I think about the big thing is, how are you going to win with this deck? I've decided with this deck it's probably a creature-heavy fighting deck, which, to be honest, totally goes against what I like to do with this game, so I probably won't play this deck a ton, but it's kind of cool that I have this deck in my box, and I kind of have this write-up of it that I've made where I can just think to myself, you know what? I'm in the mood to play a fighting deck, whatever. I'm just going to do it, especially if my opponent knows I'm more of a reaping kind of guy. That alone might be enough to throw them off. And I'm a big fan of the whole, like, bring 4 decks, ban 1 kind of approach. They get a feel for how you're doing, then you throw this deck out of nowhere, or throw this deck out to specifically counter a deck that is not ready for a fighting deck. I feel like it might be interesting. Maybe it's going to have a place in my pool of available decks, and I just thought I'd share it with you today. I'm not claiming it's a great deck, but it's an interesting one, and I think it highlights a lot of interesting things about the game. So if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, all the stuff. If you hate the video, unlike it, tell me how terrible I am, and if you want to see more of these, let me know in the comments below. I'll see you next time on Tiny Grams Games.